Welcome to today's IWE webinar, Maximizing Your Energy and Impact for Career Success. Distractions, distractions, distractions. Do you ever feel like external circumstances are directing your attention rather than you setting your own focus and priorities? Added to this is the almost infinite ways that we can be interrupted now, thanks to that technological progress. And worse still, it's technology that's been proven to be addictive, whether that's text messages, WhatsApp messages, Facebook, internal chat systems. Imagine a world instead where you feel like you're more in control of your destiny and output and performance. By managing distractions and increasing your focus, you are also increasing your energy level and reducing those nasty stress hormones that negatively impact performance. In today's webinar, we're going to figure out how to overcome distractions and improve your energy level and performance. Sorry about this. Here we go. I just wanted to do a brief introduction before we kick off, in case anybody's new to the IWE webinars. My name is Christine Brown-Quinn. I'm the female capitalist, a former international finance executive, and now author, career expert, and thought leader on women in business. And the picture to the right here is me at a book signing event at Banco BHD Leon in the Dominican Republic. And I'm signing copies of my book, Step Aside Superwoman. Career and Family is for Any Woman. And the reason I like to share this particular photo is it really brings diversity to business. So this was the launch of a credit card by Banco BHD Leon and MasterCard targeted to female professionals. So the webinar here is an opportunity for you to think about what you're doing now. And based on what you're hearing, think about what might I want to change? Remember, hearing and doing are two different things. Some of you may have heard some of these concepts or strategies before. So this may be an opportunity to revisit those. Where are you and what specific actions can you now take? So I want to launch the first poll here to just get a sense of what you're thinking. So the question is, how do you feel about your own level of energy and impact at the moment? So do you feel like, there's too much to do, there's not enough time, or feels like I do some things, but it feels like a waste? Maybe in general, you're pretty happy with your level of energy and impact. Do you feel like one side of your brain maybe is not being utilized, or finally you feel stretched too thin? Feel free to select more than one here. Okay, looks like most of you have voted here. Let me close that and share. So 50%, wow, that's really high. 50%, you feel like some of the things I'm doing are like a waste of time. 48%, so very close to that. You feel like you have too much to do and not enough time. 25% stretched too thin. 21% feel like one side of your brain is not being utilized, and 16% you're pretty happy with that balance, between and your energy and your impact. So and this is really a challenging picture here. The vast majority of us are feeling like we're really, our energy level's low. I mean, there's too much on our plate. So what can we do about that? Well, there's a saying, energy flows where attention goes. And this is a quote from the author James Redfield in his book, The Celestine Prophecy. The quote is also often used by Tony Robbins, the NLP guy. And although we know this logically, we are often pulled in so many directions with too many goals. So what happens? Our energy and attention are dispersed. And I'd also like to touch on this myth of multitasking. When we try to focus on too many things at the same time, our energy and thoughts are spread too thin. Nothing gets our full attention. Research now shows that multitasking is not as effective as it once was proclaimed. Multitasking makes it more difficult for us to organize our thoughts and filter through all the information needed to make the best decisions. And according to Professor of Informatics, Gloria Mark, the University of California, she says, there's no such thing as multitasking. People who frequently try it are not good at focusing. They're easily distracted. They're less efficient. They report higher levels of stress, frustration, and pressure. So multitasking is only effective if you're putting together things that don't need your full cognitive attention. So that's why, for instance, physical movement and thinking can be complementary. For instance, I find I get my best ideas when I'm cycling or when I'm trying to figure out a solution to a challenge. The physical activity is actually enhancing my thinking, not distracting from it. But if you have been in a meeting lately with at least one person is looking at their smartphone, they're not fully engaged in the conversation, which negatively impacts the quality and therefore the productivity of everybody in the meeting. Right? You feel like, gosh, you're wasting some of my time because you're not fully paying attention here. So the question is, where is your focus? What are you spending the bulk of your time on? Is it helping you to accomplish what you want to accomplish? What do you want to be known for? Right? You have to be the go-to person for something. So what are you the go-to person for? What's your specialty, that special skill? And that could be, problem solving, could be soft skills, could be technical skills, but all these skills need focus in order to develop. So I want to get your thoughts again on another poll on, here you go, let me launch it. So the question is, how would you rate your own level of focus and productivity? So is it, I feel like most of the time I'm focused and productive on the right thing? Or I feel like I could be more focused on higher impact activities? Or I feel like I'm just doing with little time to think about focus? I have to constantly remind myself what I should be focusing on, or I know what the focus should be, but I'm derailed by those distractions. So again, feel free to choose more than one. So I can see that these questions are really resonating with you based on the participation in the polls here, which also explains the high number of registrations for the webinar. We had nearly 500 registrations. So let me close this and share. So 56%. I know what the focus should be, but I'm derailed by distractions. And we're certainly going to dive into that shortly about the distractions. So 54% could be more focused on higher impact activities. Great. 43%, I have to remind myself often what I should be focusing on. And that doesn't surprise me because the pace is so rapid. And you get caught up in doing that, you forget to say, oh gosh, let me just stop here and reflect. What's the priority? 38%, I'm just doing with little time to think about that focus. So part of the challenge here, I guess, is how to create more time. Again, we're going to come back to that. And then 18%, I feel like most of the time I'm focused and productive on the right thing. So that's definitely the minority here feel like they've got things in balance and they're focused on the high impact activities. Let me hide that. So I'm reading a great book at the moment called Grit by Angela Duckworth. And she talks about one's focused effort is twice as powerful as their, quote, natural talent. And this is really what the diagram demonstrates here, that the talent, first the talent times the effort, so that's kind of your what you were born with, times the effort equals the skill. And then that skill, once you have that skill and then you apply it, and the effort again is the end result, that achievement or impact. So the more focused the effort, the higher the chances of success, right? So dispersed effort is not effective. Effort has to be focused. Again, you would say, oh, Christina, this is self-evident. But why aren't we doing it? Or why aren't we doing it more often? And one of the key reasons is we're derailed by those distractions, which a number of you mentioned in the poll. And we're going to pick up on that point shortly to think about strategies that we can use to get those distractions under control. And here's another diagram from Angela Duckworth's book on grit. So we've got our top level goals there, and here, the biggest is one circle, one goal, which is brilliant. Mid-level goals then to support that top level, and then the lower levels to support the mid-levels. So it's so important to think strategically about how you're spending your time. All too often we get caught up in delivering on lots of those lower level goals, right? They're the ones where we feel like, gosh, what's the impact? I do feel like this is a bit of a waste. And we don't take the time to stop and reflect whether those tasks are still relevant to achieving that top level goal. And of course, some of us will have too many top level goals, and that's not a good situation either, because then they're competing. So you have to think about, have strategic priorities changed within your group, department, or company? They're always evolving, so you have to keep up with that. And that's not just the kind of formal goals that you hear in formal communications, but it's also what you're hearing on those chats around the water cooler. What are people saying is the big focus. Also, thinking about particularly those low-level goals, what's not working or what could be done better? Because those lower-level tasks, they're only relevant for the impact that they're going to have to help with the mid-level goal, which is going to help with the top-level goal. Otherwise, you think, okay, well, let me come up with some other strategies at that lower level, which could be more effective in helping ultimately to get to that top-level goal. And what I love about this diagram is that it really demonstrates visually how too many goals or competing goals is a distraction. So definitely less is more. So I want to get your thoughts on the question about, are you thinking strategically about how you're spending your time? So what are your thoughts here? So yes, more or less, sometimes, rarely, or I definitely could be putting this into practice more often. What are your thoughts? Okay, let me close that and share. So 52%, I definitely could be putting into this into practice more often. 44%, sometimes 21%, rarely, and 11%, yes, more or less. So even for the 11%, this is about tweaking that further, and certainly taking the opportunity of this webinar to think about, oh, let me make sure that I'm building into my schedule a few minutes so that I'm reflecting instead of just doing. So let me hide that. So last month's webinar, Building, Leading, and Working on Teams, I thought it'd be really good to think about, what's the link between that and managing your energy and your impact, right? So what happens if you don't re-energize? When you show up with your team when you're mentally drained? Well, I can just visualize. I've experienced it. I lose patience, right? And we snap at things that don't even deserve that kind of reaction. Now, there's certain things that will happen that, a reaction where we are, emotional and that kind of, I've got to definitely, hit back at that. There are certain situations, but when we're not re-energized, almost any little thing can set us off. And when you're in a bad mood, when you're not at your best, that emotional contagion can set in. You affect those around you. And of course, this can happen in your personal life as well, right? Do I sound like I'm speaking from experience? You bet I am. I was especially conscious of this when I was delivering that tough performance feedback, as an example, when I worked in financial services. I tried to schedule those sorts of sessions at times when I knew my energy level and my outlook, my mindset, which we're going to talk about, was more positive. Friday afternoons and Monday mornings, I definitely avoided because I just was not, my energy level wasn't where it should be in terms of handling those delicate conversations. And, this whole point about emotional contagion is actually well observed within human science. As humans, we mimic. It goes back to, if you have children, you smile and your child smiles. So again, it's kind of how we're built. So there's definitely that link between, managing your energy and that teamwork. Now, one of the biggest energy drainers is distractions. Distractions literally suck away your productivity. And distractions can be self-induced or induced by others. Distractions induced by others is when others are interrupting you. They're ringing you. They're sending you a text. You got your email open. You're being bombarded with emails, and then there's the self-induced distractions. So instead of focusing on our key goal, we're tempted maybe to look at social media, or gosh, I'll just go get another cup of coffee, or why don't I just, call a friend before I get started on this? The reason why distractions induced by others, so especially those induced by others, take an even greater toll on our mood and productivity, so they're even more detrimental to that mood and productivity, is we have a sense of loss of control. These type of distractions, they automatically trigger our nervous system to be on that full speed, that fight or flight mode. And this is one of the reasons we get stressed. We perceive we don't have control over others interrupting us. And the negative effect of distractions is not simply linear. It's not simply a direct function of the time lost. It's greater than that. It's the time lost. So that's that. Somebody has disrupted you, but the distractions zap your energy level too. So it's really a double whammy in terms of productivity. So over time, our reaction to these distractions can transform into learned helplessness. So this whole concept of control is really powerful. When we feel we're not in control, it zaps our energy and performance. On the other hand, when we feel like we are in control, it boosts our performance. And this was actually mentioned in IWE's May newsletter in connection with agile working. It said, quote, providing employees with greater autonomy and more control over their time will lead to increased engagement, productivity, innovation, and creativity. So just to understand a little bit more about the whole topic of distraction, so we then can jump into the strategies. So it has to do a lot with biology. So at work, on average, we attend to one task for every 11 minutes before we're interrupted, and then it takes 25 minutes to return to that original task. The thing is, even if all external interruptions were turned off, phones off, closed door, we're also in a self-interrupt mode. That can kick in. Now, I want to give proper credit here to the research in this area. I mentioned Gloria Mark earlier, the professor of informatics at the University of California. And her research is focused on how information technology affects multitasking and our attention and our mood and, above all, stress. So, why are we so susceptible to being distracted? A lot of our distractivity is rooted in this biology. So let's take a quick look so we can understand why we behave the way we do. And that awareness then can help us change our behavior. It's absolutely about changing our behavior. So the first factor at play is actually the dopamine effect. And that's what's drive our wanting system. It makes us seek that want. And the effect of the distraction, it's like an addiction. We keep seeking it. The second factor at play here is that we're programmed as humans by a habit of cues and rewards, right? We do. You think about bringing up children again. They do something, that you want them to do, and you give them a reward, right? So that's a hard habit to break. The third factor, the power of thought. So even thinking about the distraction, say you're working on something, but you're thinking about somebody calling you, that distracts the task at hand, right? And the simple fact that you are aware that you're waiting for something distracts you. The fourth factor here is curiosity kills the cat. Right? Your mind will always pay attention to the new stimuli. So our brain has a bias to new things. We seek new stimuli as much as seeking food, getting food or finding a mate. So there's a battle going on in our heads between that prefrontal cortex, stay focused and get rewards, versus that brain's novelty center. Again, this is based on the research from Gloria Mark. And the fifth factor is pain and pleasure. So think about this. You're just about to leave the office, and now an associate is ringing you. And you have anxiety if you don't answer the phone. We will do anything to minimize that pain and maximize that pleasure, which is the dopamine effect. So just checking those messages, when we have that impulse makes us feel better than the pain of not checking. So the bottom line is there's nothing wrong with us, right? There's nothing wrong. I think, oh gosh, well, my attention could be better. There's nothing wrong with us. We all get distracted. So as humans, we all struggle with that distraction due to these biological factors. So we talked about the importance of keeping our energy levels up for our performance, including collaborating in teams, and especially how we need to manage those distractions as they're particularly detrimental to our energy levels. So now let's focus a minute on impact or productivity. Our efforts are the inputs, and our efforts get diluted by distractions. But the good news is those distractions can be mitigated by the mindset, right? So our mindset can really help us. So I really like this image here because it goes back to the team building and the collaborating point. In terms of the type of roles and businesses that you work in, you're not factory workers. You're not making widgets. So productivity includes the positive influence that you have working in those teams, which generates the output. And when it comes to mindset, we're in control of our mindsets and how we perceive that control as well. So you can choose to get bent out of shape or overwhelmed, or you can choose to manage your schedule, create those boundaries. You won't have control over all the distractions, but you will have some control over how you react to those distractions, right? So how do you master that mindset? How do you change your current mindset? What's the motivation? That's the key thing here. What's the motivation to changing your outlook and the way that you do things, the way that you manage distractions? What difference would it make to you, and how would you feel if you could increase your impact and you could have more, and you feel like you were more in control? Right. So think about that. That's where to begin here in terms of adopting some of the strategies that we're gonna jump into, because there will be a hesitation because it's a new habit. But you got to think about what's the outcome that I want and how am I going to feel with that outcome, right? How am I going to feel once I've made that change? So productivity is a choice. And for a habit to stay changed, people must believe change is possible. I've got to believe I can take control. And there's actually an author called Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. And he really talks about this. Productivity is a choice. Okay, so how do we take back control? Well, one of the ways is be mindful of your language. Be careful. You're listening to what you're saying. Your brain is listening. So instead of saying, for example, I don't have time, perhaps you could say, this is not a priority. And there's such a big difference between these two statements. The first one almost sounds like you're taking the blame for something, or there's something wrong with you, or you're not good enough. I don't have the time. Versus this is not a priority. With that statement, you're signaling that you are thinking strategically, right? Your focus is rightly and correctly on something else, and that you have priorities. So that's a good backdrop. Now let's jump into the tips to power your productivity. So here's the first one: prioritize and plan. And this is a diagram from Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And this diagram speaks to the reality of the workplace. And this is what we face every day. So again, some of you may have seen this before, but the point here is, well, let me revisit this and let me use this now to reprioritize what I've got on my plate at the moment. So let's dig into this. So we've got the quadrant 1, urgent and important. So that means do it now. Absolutely do it now. Then you have not urgent and important. So do later. So let's think about it. So the urgent and important, these are things that you really, it's almost a crisis, right? I've got to do this now. It's deadline driven, and also you might be last minute preparation. And quadrant 2, here the focus is on preparation and planning, relationship building. And so many of our webinars in the last 12 months have been on that piece, taking time to build those relationships and to build a good team and operate effectively within a team, because that enables our impact to be greater. It could also be risk management or prevention. So that's the difference between between the top two. And it's rarely a perfect world. There's often tension between the do now and the do later. But you have to be honest with yourself here. Is it really a drop dead deadline, right? Which is quadrant one. Or am I avoiding keeping busy with that to avoid investing in the future, to avoid, taking time to build those relationships, maybe to step out of my comfort zone a little bit and get in touch with people and try to have that connection, that new connection. So while quadrant one is really about true necessity to do it immediately, quadrant two is about quality and personal leadership. And often I find with my coaching clients that when they're stuck in one, they're not able to really step up to that leadership position. They haven't been able to make time and to think about the strategic piece. So quadrant three. So it's urgent, but it's not important. So these are things that you have to be done. They're important, but they're best handled by somebody else. One of the reasons here is that you have other, when it says not important, it means in terms of your priorities. So that means I should delegate because it has to be done, but I have I've got other focus. And it could be that, you can do it with your eyes closed. So wouldn't it be good to give somebody else the opportunity? So we're definitely going to spend a few minutes on the delegation, the delegating piece. And then we have quadrant four. So it's not urgent and it's not important. So that should be dropped. These are the things that, quote, have always been done. And I don't know whether you've had the experience, and if you raise your hand, that would be great. Have you had the experience where you've taken on a new role and somebody says to you, well, it's always been done this way, or we've always done it, right? Yeah, lots of hands going up. And that's so frustrating. And you think, well, hold on a second, given the current goals and the macro environment, this is busy work. This is time wasters. So that has to be dealt with. And Greg McEwen, author of the book Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. I love that title, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. He says, if you don't prioritize your life, somebody else will. Here's a couple other nuggets of wisdom here. So another author, Alan Lakin, who wrote the book, Take Control of Your Time and Your Life. He says, quote, you can waste time, and again, the feeling of doing something well, by starting something easy and finishing it. Now, particularly for the listeners that have been with us for a while, that I talk about honesty in webinars. We've got to really face up to what is the truth and what's happening in the workplace. And the honest truth here is that we can hide and get stuck in these boxes because we're in our comfort zone. So it's important to be honest with yourself. Given the task at hand, how should it be prioritized? And it's important to remember this can change over time, right? So an important task now could become irrelevant in the future or vice versa. So let's launch another poll here. So I just want to get a sense of how you're spending your time. So is most of your activity focused in that important box, the quad one and quad two? Or is it that you struggle to find time for those important tasks and activities? Is it that you tend to get stuck in the not important, so that's the quadrant 3 and 4? Perhaps you're struggling to determine what is a priority. Or finally, I find it difficult to delegate. Thanks for your comment, Sam. You're asking whether I can share the books that I'm mentioning. Absolutely. So in the follow-up email that I'll send out tomorrow, I'll include those. And Annette, thanks for your question as well. Let's save that one really insightful for the end, because I'm sure you're not alone in terms of the challenge there. So please continue to send your questions, and we'll pick those up at the end. Oh, the other thing I should mention is this diagram from Stephen Covey. That's also going to be included in the worksheet. So that will be included in tomorrow's email. So you get another chance to look at this and work through your activities. What are you doing now, and what boxes should they be in? Great. Okay, let me close that and share. So 45%, most of my activity is focused in quadrant 1 and 2. Fantastic. 45%, I struggle to find the time for the more important activities. 37%, I find it difficult to delegate. 22%, I tend to get stuck in not important. And 18%, I struggle to determine what's a priority. So even for those of you that are in those important quadrants, so quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, let me just put that up again. Even if you're in that, most of your activities lie there. It could also be that you could be in that fire drill mode, which is what I call quadrant 1, if you are always stuck there. And boy, have I been in positions where that was, I was in that fire drill mode all the time. And I thought, I've got to stop and figure out how I move from that to having some time to do the strategic thinking. Because if I don't, I'm not going to be able to sort out the career progression. And that really is the motivation, perhaps, in terms of thinking about changing, how you're spending your time. Great. So let's move on to the next slide here. So the most powerful question here in terms of managing your energy and your focus is, what do I need to stop doing? This is such an important question. Our time is limited. Sometimes you convince yourself that, yes, I'm going to start doing this. So after this webinar, you think, oh gosh, I've got so many ideas now, I'm going to start doing this. Well, I want you to think about what you're going to stop doing as well. This will really have a positive impact on your projects and enhance your career progression if you are able to get rid of those things that are the lower impact, because they're just taking away from your focus. We're not superheroes. We have to be more discerning about how we're spending our time. And this is a topic that I cover often in the career strategy workshops that I run when I'm helping participants with their personal business plan. Again, it's all great. Oh, these are all the things I'm going to be doing. And I say, okay, this is fantastic. But let's talk about what you're going to stop doing. And it's a difficult question. It's a really difficult question. It was really funny. Last night, I was chairing a panel discussion at an event held by Women in Fund Finance. And it was around self-advocacy and the link between self-advocacy and career progression. And one of the panelists, a guy, Ian Rand from Barclays Business Banking, he was responding to a question about one of the participants said, I just feel overwhelmed. I have so much on my plate. I just, what can I do? And he said, well, funny enough, I've just had a conversation with one of my reportees, and he said the conversation went like this. I said, you've got to be, here's a new responsibility. I need you to take on X. And his direct report said, Ian, no problem. But I'm now in the mode of, think of me as the bouncer at a nightclub. One in, one out. He said, so do you have a view in terms of what that one out is? In other words, I can't take more on my plate. So priorities have changed. So let's talk about what we're going to deprioritize. And, Ian said, what was brilliant about that soundbite is immediately I understood what the guy was saying. And there was no like, woe is me and I'm tired and I've got too much on my plate. He just said, this is the way it is. And the thing is, oftentimes we think about, well, it's our manager's job to know how much we can take on and what we're doing and what's a priority. But in reality, it's our role, and particularly the more senior you become, it's for you to figure out, okay, if that's the goal, then okay, looking at everything that's on my plate, how should that be reprioritized? And there will certainly be some things which you just should stop doing. So in terms of this tip on prioritize and plan, it really helps to set your plan for your output. So what you want to achieve and those inputs, which is the effort, the effort that you're putting in, minus the distractions, but plus that mindset where you're going to, overcome those distractions. So, set your plan for your outputs and your inputs. Think about, okay, which chunks of time are good for meetings or webinars like today. So you've obviously carved out the time for today. And I find actually putting this in my diary helps set those boundaries. So if I need to achieve something, so say I'm working on a big presentation, I will carve out time in my diary so that I can just focus on that. And then I'll carve out different times in terms of phone calls, with clients. And it just helps provide a little boundary and structure and helps me keep on track. Also, you may have days that when, it's truly necessary to have those back-to-back meetings, because you're physically present in the office on those days. And I know many of you work virtually or work from home at least part of the time. So perhaps on those days that you're working from home, allocating time to work on proposals where you need to be efficient, more larger chunks of time, or perhaps you're going through performance reviews. Again, you need larger chunks of time. So, when these are things that require that more kind of strategic thinking, and it's more efficient to do those in larger chunks, as I said. The other thing is there's research that shows that 90 minutes tends to be a really good block of time. After that, our energy levels go down, and then of course our efficiency goes down. So think about the allocation of time, perhaps in 90-minute blocks. The other thing I find, I actually had a client, Laura, who she had a attention deficiency, and she was a lawyer, a really good lawyer. And one of the tips that she had, which I've also adopted, is when I'm working on a big piece of work, say a proposal, to turn off the email, to switch off the phone, really, and clear my desk so I'm not distracted. Oh, I've got to do this and do that. So in terms of physically what you're looking at, and in terms of what's popping up on your laptop, you can set the settings so that you're not getting those interruptions. Now, of course, again, I'm a realist. You do want your team to know how to contact you when you're in that mode for true emergencies. So what's the second tip? The second tip is tame that technology. Oh my word. And the fact of the matter is that we're always at that behest of technology. And when that happens, we're in the fight and flight mode, which means we're constantly in that high alert stage. Staying in that mode, eventually you get burned out. And you deprive yourself of moving up that value chain in terms of your contribution. You're constantly in that reactive mode. No time for that planning. So that was the quadrant 2 in Steve Covey's diagram, right? No time for the planning, the strategic thinking, the new ideas, the innovation. And there's another detrimental effect here. If you're always available, you become a commodity. Others won't value your time. The psychologist Cialdini, in his book, The Psychology of Persuasion, refers to this as scarcity. And I'll mention this in my email as well, this book. So the less you are available, the more others appreciate your time. So be mindful, also, in terms of this technology, that when you're, that team building, that relationship building, those topics that we covered, that you're not distracted by the technology. You're not looking at your phone while you're trying to have the conversation. There is nothing more, gosh, you just think, this person doesn't even care about me. Their phone's more important than the interaction with me. They're not even looking at me in the eye. The third tip here is delegate diligently. Ah, yes. So simple, right? It's not simple. And let's face it, to do a great job, there are few people who can do it as well as you do it. There's no argument there, but it's a slippery slope. By not delegating, you're getting stuck in your career, right? So Scott Eblin, the leadership coach, he talks about focusing on, focus on what only you can do or where you're adding the most value. And he says, quote, without taking some time to remind yourself to ask this question, it's easy to get sucked into meetings that don't require your input and expertise. So I want you to think about, for you, in terms of the delegating point, what is the most challenging aspect for you? Is it, I don't know how to delegate effectively, or I don't like to ask other people to do things for me? I don't like the feeling of not being in control. I don't like to let go of things that I do well, or I'm concerned someone else may do the job, too well, and that's going to make me look bad. So what are you finding the most challenging aspects of delegating? Sophie also says, I don't feel like I'm in a position to delegate. And Sam says, no, sorry, Eleanor says, I often feel free. There is no one, feel that there is no one to delegate to. Well, one of the things I would say is also thinking about this task. Should it be delegated? That maybe is a good place to start as well. But we'll pick up on those questions shortly. So let me close that and share. So 60% say, I don't like the feeling of not being in control. 55%, I don't like to ask other people, to do something. 44%, I don't like to let go of things that I do well. That's our comfort zone. It makes us feel good, and it's so easy to continue to do that. 17%, I don't know how to delegate effectively, or 14%, I like the honesty here. I'm concerned somebody else might do it well. Now let's think. I think it's really important here to think about, why bother delegating? So, why is that important? Well, first of all, it's a better use of your experience, skills, and knowledge. And that's almost how you define that, this is something that I can do with my eyes closed, and there's other things that I could add more value. And if there isn't somebody that comes to mind, this might be something to think, to suggest to your manager, to say, I could really be adding more value to the project if I did this, therefore I need to delegate this other piece. Any suggestions there? You might also talk to some colleagues for ideas as well. Another reason to bother delegating is that the more senior you become, and in order to become more senior, you're expected to anticipate and plan and not just react. So that's really interesting, this expectation. And that's something I kind of had to learn, that when I was in this doing mode, I was getting the feedback, well, Christine, if you want to be promoted to MD, you really, I don't understand why you're at this level, right? And that actually made me look more junior because I wasn't delegating. Delegating also improves morale and motivation. You're giving other people the opportunity to learn new skills. And you're also giving them the opportunity to understand maybe other aspects of the business, and an opportunity for others, to grow and develop. I noticed when in my corporate career, when I went on holiday, that was always a great opportunity to see, in terms of people taking interest and stepping up into the different responsibilities, that, well, actually, I should pull, I can pull back from that, so and so can handle that, really well. So think about, so this is going back to Sophie and Eleanor's point here. So think about the task. Who's best placed to take on that task, and then the training deadline. And as I said, if you're not sure who, perhaps you can get some feedback on that. I was recently talking to, I had a coaching session with my client Maggie, and she was explaining to me that in terms of positioning herself for an increased role, that where she felt she added value was, she has a kind of COO role. She was able to take the monthly information, and she interacts with the business lines and says, okay, here's how your business is doing. She said, the problem is I don't have enough time on that, but that's where I think I add value. I really add value. And then I can work with the business lines in terms of getting them not to reinvent the wheel. I share information across business lines, and I really help them take that business to the next level. And I said, Maggie, well, this reports that you produce, can't somebody else do those? And she says, well, they do. The accounting department does those, but I do the analysis. I said, well, is there anybody in the accounting department that perhaps has the aptitude and the interest to take on that role? Perhaps you could teach them. Perhaps it would help them understand the business. And she was thrilled, absolutely thrilled. And making that change, okay, and the delegating, I get it. It takes time and patience. But by doing that, you really are freeing yourself up in the medium and long term to higher value activities. And that's exactly what Maggie's done. So the fourth tip here, manage meetings mania. I think now that we've come into a culture where we're almost defining how important we are by the number of meetings. But it's not the number of meetings, it's the impact of those meetings. So the first question is, what's the objective of that meeting? If there's no objective, decline to attend. And think about how you can add value to that particular meeting if you do understand the objective. Make sure, are you the right person, or somebody else attend that meeting? Sometimes I feel like there's that badge of honor that we're so busy with meetings. So instead, be more intentional about the meetings that you choose to participate in, and what outcome are you targeting? And given that outcome, work backwards. Okay, that's what I'm looking to achieve. So what needs to happen? So instead of jumping from meeting to meeting, before each meeting, think about, how do you want people to feel? How do you want people to think? And how do you want people to act? This could really help you change the productivity of those meetings. And so what does a good meeting look like? Establish the objective. We talked about that. Be attentive. Listen. Stay present. Listening. We talked a lot about how important that is in building relationship. Synthesize. So here, think about what's being said, and then, meetings are that's where a collaboration can take place, right? So you've got that idea, and then it synthesizes, it changes into something else based on that conversation. And then finally, summarize. Key takeaways, what's happening next, who's doing what, really, really brief, but clear. And this actually helps to keep people motivated, because otherwise you leave a meeting and you say, well, what happened there? What's next? And so that can be really powerful. And I saw this in action early on in my career with Bloomberg, who was a supplier of the bank I was working for, and I have meetings with them. And really, meetings normally 30 minutes, never an hour. That's another trick in terms of the management. And then always the salesperson would say, "Okay, so this is where we are, and here's the next steps." And I love that. Here's the next steps. And if you're in a position where you think, "Oh, Christine, these are all great ideas, but I'm at the behest of somebody else, the leader or whatever," you can make suggestions. You could say at the beginning of a meeting, "Can I just confirm what the objective is here?" Or at the end to say, "Oh, before we break up, could we just summarize?" So, speak up. Now, the fifth tip here is rule by routines. So my daily routine: get up, be amazing, and go back to bed. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the routines help us establish those habits. They help us be more productive, and they really counter those biological factors that we talked about earlier. And so it makes it easier to kind of stick to the plan. Now, the point here is take small steps, and small steps lead to small wins and that greater success. But it takes time to relearn those behaviors of self-control. So routines will definitely support those new habits. And it's not about, a complete makeover here. It really is about tweaks. So quick summary here on our tips. So first, we have prioritize and plan. Second, tame the technology. Third, delegate diligently. 4, manage meetings mania. And 5, rule by routines. So I want you to reflect for a minute in terms of these 5 tips. Which of these could you focus on? What would be helpful for your situation at the moment? And feel free to select more than one. Okay, let me close that and share. So the winner is prioritize and plan. So 70% of you say that would really be helpful. 43% tame the technology. 33% delegate diligently. 35% rule by routines, and 30% manage meetings mania. So something for everybody there, but certainly the prioritize and plan was your first choice, which that's great to hear, because the exercise that I mentioned, I think is going to be time well spent. So let me hide that. And before I answer a few more questions here that have come in, I just want to end on a quote, which is this is another author here, Cal Newport, and in his book here, that the image is the cover of his book, and he says the following on deep work. Deep work hypothesis: the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare. At exactly the same time, it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate the skill and then make it to the core of their working life will thrive. So this is pretty powerful stuff in terms of positioning yourself for career and business success. So let's take a few more questions here. A lot of comments have come in through about the delegating. So that's really hit a a hot button for you. And I think so. Here's a comment from Sally. You delegate, and the other person doesn't pick it up, and you are still held responsible for it or for its non-progression. And I think, Sally, here I hear Sally, I completely understand, and I hear the frustration. And part of this is about kind of honing those delegation skills. So the first thing I would say is if somebody is not progressing something, to stop and say, okay, this is what we talked about, and this is where we wanted to be. We're not there. Talk to me. What's going on here? I find that when you let people, give them the floor in, how are things going, that they will identify the problems themselves, and by doing that, they're taking ownership of them. The other thing here could be perhaps they didn't have enough training or training on the things that they needed. And this is where the challenge is that every individual is different, and you delegate something, could be the same task, and one person you delegate it to, you quickly explain and they're off and running. And then another one, they struggle. And you think, well, why is that? So each individual is different, but that's why it's important to think about, okay, what is the training required? So you've identified the person, and maybe you've made a mistake. That happens as well. You've identified somebody to take on the task, but they were clearly not up for it, and that happens as well. So in that situation, you have to kind of say, okay, that didn't work. It's not that I shouldn't be delegating. I have to delegate if I want to have more impact. That's a fact. So perhaps it's identifying, okay, well, what have I learned from that? And then who else would be better positioned to do that, to take on that task. Here's a comment from Helen. Do you have any more tips or resources for people with ADHD? I'll have to think about that, Helen, and kind of remember my client Laura in terms of other tips that she had. So I'll come back to you on that one. Janet, do you have any? I'm a computer. I'm a completer. I'm a completer finisher, so it's difficult to delegate. Concerned if it won't get done in time or at all. Absolutely. And this is the challenge. You're so good at what you do that giving it to somebody else, the reality is they're not going to do it to the same standard. And part of that's going to be because of the experience. They haven't done it. They haven't had the experience of doing it. Now, there are some upsides as well. Maybe because you've been doing something for a while, maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a better way to approach this. And maybe with a fresh set of eyes, somebody could suggest, well, why don't we tweak this? Why don't we tweak that? I think in terms of the completer finisher, again, it's about moving up that value chain. If you are able to do that, where and what could you be doing that adds greater value than that? So by delegating that piece, what are some of the things you could be focusing on which are higher value? That management leadership point. And it's a really hard thing to let go, and that's why I wanted to spend time on the benefits, because you will get stuck if you're not able to delegate those things that are, and then the test is almost like a test. Is that the right thing to delegate? Well, one of the tests is if I can do it with my eyes closed, then that's probably something that I should delegate. And in terms of those, what are some of those higher value activities? That might be something that you want to get, feedback on as well. Here's a comment from Annette. I'm assigned to 4 different projects, all part-time. Can you suggest how do I plan my day so that I'm not multitasking and getting distracted by one project when working on another? I think it is a bit tricky because of the number of projects. One, I would just kind of have a heart-to-heart talk with yourself and say, okay, does that make sense for me to have 4 projects? Are all 4 in terms of, remember Angela Duckworth's diagram, are all 4 priority, in terms of that bigger goal for your department, right? Are all 4 of those equal priority? So that's where you start. And then, ideally, it sounds to me, ideally, it would be good maybe to reduce those. If not, if the decision is after reflection, it's all 4, then the question is, how can I divide up those activities in a way that when I would almost call it like when I'm in a role, I'm in a on a roll. So for the days where I really do need to be touching base with the team members, to have more than one conversation like that can really be effective. So perhaps putting together different aspects of the project together. So for all 4 projects, say, okay, well, today is about updating the team, and tomorrow are these tasks. But I think where I would start, Annette, is really thinking about 4 projects. That seems like a lot. Is there any way to change the time frame? Now I know I can hear you pushing back, and you could be saying, but Christine, this is not reality for me to suggest that this is the focus and not that. I'm expected to do everything. And I know, especially for some of the investment banks that I talk to, headcount's cut, and then they say, okay, well, you still have to do what you were doing before. The reality is, let's have an adult conversation. We're not superheroes. I want the business to be successful. In order to do that, in order to get to that goal that both you and I want, let's talk about what the priorities should be. So what I'm suggesting here is to really pushing back on that answer, because it's just not reality. We're adults. We're really adults. Now, I didn't get through all the questions today. If you would like to have a chat, a telephone chat, or an email discussion, please do contact me. I'd love the questions. And as I said, the email that will go out tomorrow will be the action worksheet, which will definitely focus on that prioritize and plan. And I'll mention some of the books that I mentioned in today's webinar. Great being with you today. Bye for now. Bye-bye.